I told them that I would not be writing on Sikh history, and I would write on, I wrote on international relations. It's sad that, we still seem to be adopting Western icons and so on. We forget to build our own. And let's be clear, you need to build your own icons. And that's something I've always held very dear to me. It was stupendous. For me, it was that here we were looking at a piece of armor, and even that had the element of invoking the divine, of the script, of the Bani of the Gurus in it. We as a community needed justice. India as a country needed justice to be done. Forgotten the poet. We've forgotten the man who created literature, who was a patron of arts, a man who sent people to Kashi.
Hi, welcome to the Mohua show. My name is Mohua Chinappa and I am an author, entrepreneur and ex-housewife. This podcast is about everything from business to technology to arts to lifestyle, but done and spoken ईमानदारी से.
Hi, in today's episode, we have with us Roopinder Singh, an esteemed journalist and author with a wealth of experience in Sikh history and culture, among other subjects. He earned his BA in Philosophy Honours and MA in Philosophy from St. Stephen's College, Delhi. Subsequently, he worked as a journalist in New York, USA for 6 years. Later, he moved to Chandigarh, where he retired as the senior associate editor of North India's leading daily newspaper, which he's going to tell us all about, the Tribune. In his 3 decades there, he wrote extensively and held many charges, including that of the Sunday magazine Spectrum, the Education Tribune section, and Login Tribune. He was also in charge of the book review section and founded the Internet edition. An award-winning photographer, he continues to write books and speak at academic and public forums. So welcome in today's episode, Roopinder.
My pleasure to be here, Mohua. My pleasure to be with you.
I'm so proud to have you, and it's an honor to have you here with me today. So you've authored several books, including ones on Guru Nanak Dev and Marshal of the Indian Air Force, Arjan Singh. What sparked your interest in Sikh history and culture, and how has this passion evolved over the years?
Well, it's been kind of organic, frankly. I was writing on various topics, and in fact, originally when I joined the Tribune, I told them that I would not be writing on Sikh history. And I would write on, I wrote on international relations, I wrote on IT. Login Tribune was an IT supplement, the first print supplement we had in North India on IT. But what happened was that from time to time, I would be requested to write, and that's how my writing career starts. I did a full-length interview with Marshal of the Indian Air Force, Arjan Singh, when he got, the rank of the Marshal. And this was published in Spectrum in February 2002 or so. After that, I got a call from a former senior of mine, one of my bosses, Raj Chauhan, who was then a commissioning editor with Rupa and Company. And he said if I would be interested in writing a book. So I went to Arjan Singh Saab and I said, sir, I want to write a book on you. And his sort of reaction was typical, he says, Roopinder, what will you write about me? I said, sir, just give me a chance. There's a lot to write about you and I want to do it. Oh, okay. So what I would do is I would drive down from Chandigarh early in the morning on a Sunday and then spend time with him. And he was very happy with me because he says, Roopinder, you keep Air Force time. Because I was extremely punctual. I knew who I was dealing with. He was somebody I had admired for many years. In fact, at one point, as I reminded him, we were swimming together at the Rashtrapati Bhavan. So, I had seen him socially, but this was the time I got to know him through his achievements. That turned out to be a very interesting book. A small book because Rupa was coming out with what they call the Tritravli series, which was the kind of Indian counterpart to Ladybird series. And they brought in a series with more than 30 people, including Abdul Kalam Azad. And that's how they, expanded it a lot. And I'm sad to say that as a series, it did not take off as much as I expected it to. Somehow we are not ready for Indian icons, which we should be. Now, on the
That's true.
launch, yeah, it's sad. It's sad that, we still seem to be adopting Western icons and so on. We forget to build our own. And let's be clear, you need to build your own icons. And that's something I've always held very dear to me, which meant that I would be writing about people who uh, were from the region because I was serving the region in the Tribune. So that's how slowly, over a period of time, a lot of my articles touched upon people who were Punjabis. A lot of them were Sikhs. This led to more interest in institutions and so on and so forth. Once we had done this, before I left him, Mehra Sahab extracted a promise from me to write on Guru Nanak. I said, fine, I'll do it. And I must admit, I was rather cocky. And I thought, everybody's worked on Guru Nanak, so I need to look at a couple of references and put together something like a journalist does. Well, it turned out to be a very tough book to write. My father, who was a well-known scholar, Gobind Singh, was very worried that I would not have the required gravitas for the book. My mother gave me something like 32 books from her personal library on Guru Nanak and said, son, you got to read all of these before you finish. Before you start. So I said, Mom, 32. Yeah. These are the books I have. I'm sure there are others which you need to look at. But trying to understand the founder of the Sikh faith and presented him in a way that was easy for people to understand meant that I really had to work on understanding his thought and him as a person, which I did. I think by the end of it, I gained a certain understanding of the Guru, which I was able to communicate through my book. And that's how Guru Nanak, his life and teachings, became what it is. And I must also add that when we started the book, we were looking at a smaller book. As I worked on it, it expanded. And when I gave it to Mehra Saab, he asked somebody to design it. They sent the design. I was very happy with it. So I called him up and I said, Saab, ye baat nahi bani. Mehra Saab is such a magnanimous person. He says, साहब फिर आपको आना पड़ेगा ना यहाँ ये ऐसे नहीं होगा अच्छा ठीक है आ जाता हूँ 3-4 दिन यहाँ लगाने पड़ेंगे हमारे पास दिल्ली में and he told the designer do what Sardarji tells you. That's what she told me. She quoted him. He's told me do what Sardarji tells you. I said, okay, in that case, it's simple. Let's work on it. And we worked on the format. We worked on the book, on where the placement of each and every visual was. And it turned out to be, something which I had in my mind, which thankfully Mehra Saab liked.
I
Now
too have a copy of that book of yours with me.
that's a book that, it's been 20 years. It's still in print.
Yes, it is. So the transitioning, Roopinder, from journalism to writing books is obviously a huge leap. So what motivated you? That one point where you said, okay, fine, I will do this entire transition. And obviously you will face challenges because writing books isn't easy. It requires so much of in-depth research, especially a subject like yours. So I'm also told that you're a publisher and an author. Okay. You wear so many hats. My God, Rupinder, I have to really go down into checking all of them so that I don't lose out on anything on this podcast. How did you get involved with Sahit Prakashan?
Sahit Prakashan was my father's company. He started a newspaper in 1946 called Prakash, which was a Punjabi newspaper in Patiala. It eventually also had an Urdu edition. and it was the only daily newspaper in Pepsu, which is Patiala and East Punjab States Union. He also started publishing books under the imprint of Sahit Prakashan. And his most famous book is a book called Mera Pind, My Village. And that's the only book that's won a UNESCO award, only Punjabi book that's won a UNESCO award. And we've done very well with the book. It was published in 1961. And I mean, last year we had to print it 3 times. So Sahit Prakashan is something that basically now is something we use to print my father's books. And that's all. So even though I publish my father's books and I've used it to publish a couple of my books, my basic work is in English and it's published by various other publishers. Not I don't do self-publishing. As far as the transition from journalism to becoming an author is concerned, it's a huge thing, as you rightly said, Mohua. When you look at anything that's journalistic, you start off with a few hundred words. You go up to 1,000, 1,500, and you think, oh my God, I've really done a day's work. When you're looking at books, it's in tens of thousands of words. So there's this huge gap that you have to do. So in a way, I'm glad that I started off with the MIF Arjan Singh, because that was a small book. It was meant for a younger lot, and it was what they used to call a CD-sized book. So that's how, Mr. Chauhan persuaded me. He says, Roopinder, you've already done a full-page interview with him. You've done features on him. You can easily do the book also. Well, it wasn't as simple as that. That also took a lot of time, lot of effort, but it put me on that path. And by Guru Nanak, I knew, what kind of a format we were looking at, what it would be. I would chapterize it and then work on it. And I'm reasonably methodical about it. I don't lay claims to massive bouts of creativity or anything of that sort. In my case, it's simple. I put my head to the grindstone and I just work at it.
There's obviously a huge influence of your parents and the entire legacy that they've left behind with you. So why don't you share with us a little bit of the impact that you've had from your father and mother both?
Well, let me tell you this. It's something I live with, because today in the morning I was releasing a book on a journalist, one of our senior colleagues, VP Prabhakar, who was the first bureau chief of the Tribune. And after I released the book, I was talking about it, and I told those guys an incident of how when I joined the Tribune, I wrote a piece in Punjabi. And I can't count the number of people who came up to me and to tell me that, I was not a patch on my father. So that was that. Yes, they've been extremely encouraging. My father used to push me a bit towards writing because he saw that, I could write. But there was a teacher in school called Mr. Duffy who really encouraged me. He was one of the American aid teachers. And he thought I had a spark which could be exploited. And when I went to America, I spent quite some effort looking for him, but these are the pre-internet days, and I could not get in touch. Later, I discovered more about him and found out that he had passed on. As far as my mother is concerned, she was an academic. She was the first woman vice chancellor of North India. And when she became a vice chancellor in 1975, there were only 3 women vice chancellors in the world. So she worked very hard to prove herself. And as a result of that, I think she pushed herself a little too much. It did tell on her health also. But she wanted to be sure that she did get things right. after that, when she went to Delhi and she became chairman, Staff Selection Commission, I think she mellowed a bit by that time. Now, that's the role I kept in mind in my career path. As far as my writing is concerned, they were my first readers, they were my first critics, they were my sources for various things. I mean, I would write something, I would work late into the night, early morning, I would drop it. By the time I got ready, my mother would have seen it and commented on. Now, this would work very well if I was doing feature writing. Of course, if I was doing a news story or something that's instantaneous, you do it. But they were involved with my creative effort right from the beginning. And I learned from them, I learned from their friends, I learned through the kind of people that came to our home. A lot of them would, talk of things which I would have an interest in. And I don't know, somehow one absorbs all this without realizing it, which is what happens.
So, your book really, offers a very profound insight into the various aspects, of the Sikh heritage and history. And it's my first podcast actually with anyone on this subject. So it's extremely special to me, Rupinder. Can you tell me a little bit about, the most notable works and the stories behind them from your book? Something that has stayed back with you from the book.
When we started writing Sikh Heritage, I'm a co-author in that book. It's called Sikh Heritage, Ethos and Relics. And my co-author is Bhai Sikandar Singh. Bhai Sikandar is from the Bagdiya family, which has a connection to the time of the Gurus. And they are a very widely respected religious family. Bhai Sikandar was educated in Canada, and from there he came back to India and he is here. He's senior to me. We went to the houses of people who had relics from the time of the Gurus. And we were very careful in narrowing it down to the people whose family connections could be traced back to the time of the Gurus. Now, this kind of happened a year or two after my father had passed on. That's when we started on the book. And often wherever I went, people would talk of my father. And I remember going to one house and this old gentleman looking at me with, his eyes were not particularly well focused. And somebody asked him, "Pehchante ho kaun hai?" So he said, "Gyani Gurdat Singh da munda hai, aur kaun hai?" So, it had a definite emotive aspect, and I took photographs for it. Then we wrote it. And what really touched me was the piety of the people who kept the relics. These were not the people we featured in the book, were not the people who were trying to exploit it for any gains. They recognized that their family had a very precious legacy which they wanted. So, among the interesting things is the way we went to Maharaja Naba's house in Delhi. It took 3 appointments and 2 aborted trips before we got there. But once we met him, he was so hospitable. The reverence with which he would bring the relics to show them to us, it was something. And, there was this broadsword of Guru Har Gobind. It's a huge sword. He was a very strong person. In Sikh terms, there's a reference to him as being Padi, Takda. So I had a tough time just picking it up like this on my hands. It was so tough. It was a very broad sword, very beautifully kept, and it had not been embellished. Then I looked at the armor of Guru Gobind Singh, which was with the Maharaja of Patiala. And that was a thing which I'll never forget. The beauty of that armor, the Gurmukhi calligraphy of all the various extracts from the Guru Granth Sahib on it. It was stupendous. For me, it was that here we were looking at a piece of armor, and even that had the element of invoking the divine, of the script of the Bani of the Gurus in it. I mean, these are things that stay with you throughout your life. And I felt immensely privileged to be able to do this. Then what happened was that, we were in collaboration with the Smithsonian for that book. So I was talking about it and I said, we are looking at people who will not know what these relics are, even though we have described them, we've given their connection to the people. We need to set a stage for this. Now, saying this meant writing almost another book on Sikh ethos. What is it that Sikhs are about? But I'm happy to say that eventually, even though it took us 5 years to finish that book, it was well received. And it was a proud day for me when Mrs. Gursharan Kaur released the book at the IIC. This would be 2012.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about Guru Nanak, his life and teachings. Which in its 20th year of publication, it's still going very strong. So, what makes it such a long tail book? कितना क्या क्या चीजें आपने cover की रुपिंदर जी इसमें? Tell us about that.
देखो इसमें first thing I must say is that the word long tail was used by Maratha. And he said, sir, आपकी ये किताब है ना जो ये बहुत देर चलेगी. So I must commend him for his foresight. And I'm not very sure about what makes it such a book that keeps on getting reprinted. I think it is the power of the Guru's message, which comes through. We have a chapter on Aarti, which is, a beautiful composition by the Guru. Then again, it's the simplicity of the writing in the book. To my mind, the Guru's message is so powerful that I don't need to sort of embellish it with any language. I needed to present it to people in a language that everybody could understand. And I worked very hard at that. Of course, this is where my journalistic training also helps. Because, you want to reach out to the largest number of people. And in this, I'm quite a fan of the American model. The American way of presenting things in a simple manner is something that I learned when I started as a journalist there. And I must confess, I was an arrogant little young man at that point. And I remember when I was doing a course on journalism at NYU and running a small newspaper there, this teacher of mine, I wrote something and she says, could we simplify it, Mr. Singh? I said, no, because my language has expressed what I want it to express. And she says, yeah, but do you know that the Wall Street Journal has a rule that, if a ninth grader cannot understand it, they don't want it. So it was a kind of, it made me think again. And over the years, I learned how to get to the straightforward message which was necessary. That's what I applied very consciously in writing the book on Guru Nanak Dev Ji. Also, let me tell you that there is a visual appeal to the Pahadi paintings we have here. I mean, that's Nansuk's work. Nansuk is one of the finest Pahadi painters we have. Professor B.N. Goswami, the late Professor B.N. Goswami, would wax eloquence about Nansuk. And that kind of transferred to me also. And he helped me out with this. It takes a whole lot of people for you to be with you before your book comes into being. And I'm really grateful to the people who helped me shape it up.
Absolutely. You are so right when you say this, Rupinder. It takes so many people to be with you before you publish a book. I know that for sure. So, you know what? We also need to hear from you. What made you write about the 1984 anti-Sikh riots? I mean, do you think that 1984 is still fresh in the minds of the Sikh community? I mean, I was in Delhi at that time, and I had seen the atrocities that was being committed on the Sikhs, and my I still shudder when I look back at the way people were just burnt alive, women were raped, and it's a part I think that the Sikhs in India will never ever forget. And but I would really like to hear from you that what made you write about this.
This was a book that was long simmering in me. Like you, I was also there in Delhi in 1984 during the riots or the anti-Sikh violence, as I call it. Because riots mean two sides. Here, there was only one
Yes.
uh, being victimized. Uh, also, the thing about it was the way people turned, your world turned upside down. I mean, you could not get out of your house. You suddenly had to. My father was at Ames when Mrs. Gandhi came there. So he came out of there. He took an auto to come home. He grabbed the first auto he could, whatever he could, and he got home. Uh, we saw the damage that it did to our psyche. And I wanted to bring it out, but I wanted to bring it out in a different way, which is why it is my first and only attempt at historical fiction, so to say. It's fiction, but it's based on history and it's heavily grounded in what happened. And I don't think we'll forget it. People who've been through it, both Sikhs and non-Sikhs. I'm very proud of a number of my non-Sikh friends who went all out to help the Sikhs, to help the victim, uh, and they haven't forgotten it. They eventually would write books about it also. Uh, the way the world turned upside down left a scar, and the lack of justice and the whole cover up thereafter, you still feel that people have not been able to get the justice they deserve. And that's really, really what's at the bottom of it all. We were wronged. We as a community needed justice. India as a country needed justice to be done. If, whenever there is mob violence, if you don't nip it in the bud, it continues in various forms and the wounds fester in the community that has been wronged. I mean, look at Chandni Chowk. One brave police officer takes a stand, opens fire, and there's no problem. People run. It takes somebody with a very clear moral fiber to be able to take a very difficult decision at that time. And somehow, most of the people at the helm at that time exhibited anything but that.
Absolutely. There were many policemen who decided to turn to look the other way when all the violence was happening. And I remember feeling exceptionally, I was very young, of course, at that time, but it just turned me inside out because I had very close Sikh friends, and we knew that their doors were locked and people came knocking and checking whether in our colony in New Delhi, whether there were Sikhs around us so that they could kill them. So yes, it is a very very dark chapter in the history of modern India, I would say. 80s is not too far behind us,
Yes.
So, your biography on Marshal of the Indian Air Force, Arjan Singh, is a significant contribution to military history, right? So, what was the most fascinating aspect of researching and writing about such a legendary figure? Please tell us some anecdotes, some fun things that you encountered while you were writing about him.
He had a very lovely way, a disarming way of tackling you. For example, the first meeting, he points to his ears and he says, Rupinder, ਮੈਨੂੰ ਉੱਚਾ ਸੁਣਦਾ ਹੈ ਪਰ ਆਪਾਂ ਇਹਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਲਿਖਾਂਗੇ ਨਹੀਂ. I said, ਹਾਂਜੀ. You know, that human, suddenly, the legend became human. I said, yes, sir, I can relate to that. He was, he just had that way of dealing with people. Then he could be very, very firm. I remember somebody calling up and he wanted a favor and he said, नहीं मैं पहला भी आपको बताया मैंने, मैं नहीं करूँगा. That was it. Yet, let me tell you this. He had a farm near Delhi. And he had built his farm. He loved going to his farm. And he lived in the poshest area of Delhi, Patale Marg. He had these two houses there. Fabulous place. And one day he calls me up and he says, Roopinder, I guess, sir, oh, bhai, main aaj jat nahi reha. I'm no longer a jat. So I said, sir, ki ho gaya? He said, I sold my farm off. I said, what? How could that happen? He says, no, I've sold it off. And I've earmarked all the money to a trust which will take care of the other ranks in the Air Force. They have their post-retirement needs. And I spoke to my wife, I spoke to my children, I got their permission, sold the farm, and gave the entire money to the Air Force. That was Marshal of the Air Force. I mean, he really was a person you could look up to all the time. Then, one time, I was with him, my second last meeting. And I went up and for the first time, his aide said, sir will meet you in the bedroom. So I said, okay. I went up to him and he was, we wear a turban and we wear an underturban. So he was wearing an underturban wrapped around his head. And we were chatting and the guy came, I said, take a picture. So he said, yes, Roopinder, this is for you, not for public. So I still have the picture. I remember him looking at it and I've never ever posted it. So, there was something so sweet about him. Then when his birthday came up, I'm not very sure, the second last birthday, he called up and he said, Roopinder, I want you in Delhi. So my wife Jaspreet and I went there. We attended the birthday and his aides were very keen that, he come on a wheelchair. He refused. He walked into the place. You could see that it was an effort, but he made the effort. And when Prime Minister Manmohan Singh came there, he stood up. And I mean, it was really wonderful to see these two old gentlemen greet each other and be there for each other at a time when both of them were facing various physical ailments. I mean, he was just a wonderful person and he had a very wry sense of humor. Then one day we were talking while we were doing the book and he tells me, he used to cycle down from Teen Murti Bhavan to Air Force headquarters. So he says one day, one of the Indian Express photographers took a picture of him and his daughter cycling down. And he says, "Theek hai, khich li." When it comes out in the newspaper, there is hell to pay because everybody's saying, how can you do this? And so on and so forth. But he was like that only. He really, he could be formal. He, of course, had a very formal thing, but under it, was a very easygoing person. And if he felt he could trust you, he did, and he opened up a lot. So for me, learning about him during the book was stupendous. And let's not forget his wife Teji. She is the one who gave me all the pictures which are there in the book. She is the one who would prompt him with about various things. A wonderful, wonderful, supportive lady who, you know, he loved. Let me tell you, he first saw her when she was playing tennis in Delhi. He fell in love with her. She was a youngster and he was already a pilot. So he, as he said, I waited for her to grow up and then I married her. And that's what happened.
How sweet. So you also started the internet edition of the Tribune in 1998. What was it like to take a century-old newspaper into the cyber world? Wasn't Login Tribune the first newspaper for North India?
Yes, Login Tribune was the first print newspaper about uh, computers and IT in North India. The Hindu had something, we were the other one. And uh, other papers started a bit later. As far as the internet edition goes, you know that famous saying, Andho mein Kana Raja? I was, I started off, with the computers right from the time I went to America, which was 1985. I got my first Mac there. I started working on the computers. And when I came to the Tribune, uh, they were using computographic machines and so on. And a Mac was something they were least knowledgeable about. So I would actually print out my articles and then give the printout, which would then be inputted and then it would come in the paper. So when the internet edition was to be started, they told me, they said, why don't you, do it? I said, okay. So we selected two people from the newsroom and we started the internet edition. And there was so many apprehensions about it, about the internet coming into the office. One of my senior colleagues thought, this would all be, used for watching porn. So it was not a coincidence that the two people selected to work with me were happily married young men. you know, we, at a certain time, a suggestion was actually floated that there should be a glass room so that people could see what we were doing. We managed to put that away. So when we started, you are talking of dial-up connections. And there was a guy who would be on the dial-up using a software, and he'd suddenly say, "Sir, connection lag gaya." The minute he said it, I'd say, "Okay, okay, कौन सा page हो गया? Page भेजो भाई, दो तीन page तो भेज दो, देखी जाएगी." That kind of a thing. But it wasn't designing the website that my experience came through. I was given a free hand by the then editor Harijay Singh and the trust. And the trustee, chairman of the trust was B.K. Nehru. And he, after an interaction, said, "This young man seems to know what he's talking about. Give him a free hand. Let him do what he has to. We don't know what to guide him." So that's what happened. They gave me a free hand, and I worked out with a company here. And for the first time, we did what was a kind of a Copernican revolution in presentation of material on the net. Till that time, various other newspapers who preceded us online would put in the print as page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4, and would give them. Thanks to having lived abroad, I had some idea of what people wanted. So in the Tribune, we started uploading content according to states. And in that also, Punjab had the first top button, Haryana, Himachal, Chandigarh. And Delhi came after that. So there was some grumbling about why the national capital would come, but I was very clear that we have our audience which wants to know about their homeland. Why are they coming to the Tribune? Because they want to know about the home. So then we had this thing. I had a friend of mine who asked me in Delhi, Rupinder, why is it that you have these small regional briefs? Who's bothered about what happened in a Bathinda village? I said the people from that village who've gone abroad. For them, this is their most important thing. And it was a very popular page online, much more popular than here. So we would amalgamate, we would redo the matter, we'd come it up. We didn't spend any money on publicity. Just send out an email to everybody. And I requested Hari Jai Singh and got his permission to use his name. So people started sending each other mails. Tribune editor wrote to me and invited me to see the paper, and they would pass it on to their friend and their friend and their friend, and that's how the edition started. We have done extremely well with that edition. Of course, now there's a lot of video content and so on. We had video even in those days, small little snippets from ANI. But now there's much, much more, as it ought to be. It's a multimedia site now. And I'm very, very proud of the work we've been able to do.
How fantastic, Rupinder. But before we kind of come to the closing, I've got a few rapid fire questions with you. What's your favorite book and that you've written among all the books that you've written, and why?
The favorite would definitely be Guru Nanak. Because I think I was able to convey what I want to convey in a very simple, straightforward format. And it's definitely a book that's done very well. So on both parameters, that book would be my favorite.
Okay. And one thing that people might be surprised to learn from you, if you could, interview any historical figure or VIP today, who would it be and why?
If I could interview anybody, I would want to interview, or I don't know if interview is the word for it, but yeah, Guru Gobind Singh. We have somehow, focused only on one aspect of him, and we made it as if he was a great warrior, which he was. But we've forgotten the poet. We've forgotten the man who created literature, who was a patron of arts, a man who sent people to Kashi to understand the scriptures and to translate them into the local languages in Punjab so that our people could understand it. And there's so much more to him than we've been able to present. And I really would want to learn more about it. In a short lifetime, he changed our life.
And the last question, Rupinder, for all our listeners who are listening to you right now and they want to write, on maybe culture and, on any historical topic, what are the things that they need to keep in mind?
Listen more whenever you want to write, because often people talk about writing as a form of self-expression. And I am not sure if I understand that well, because to me, writing is something which is always for an audience. We tend to forget that. And we have to remember that we are hoping that our audience is going to be wide. We are hoping that our audience will consist of various kinds of people. And we should be able to communicate what we want in a very simple way to them. Also, let's be serious about the kind of content that we want to present and do our research. Anything that we say or write can be challenged, and we should be prepared for that. We have to be prepared for that. So please do your homework. Creativity is no rocket science. It's just a lot of hard work, which people somehow think, is not necessary, whereas that's the foundation of all creative endeavor. It's doing it, it's working on it, it's polishing it, and then looking at it from various eyes owning your skills all the time. Yeah, it's wonderful to be able to do it. It's wonderful to be able to reach out to people. But when we reach out to people, we have a responsibility that what we present to them is the best we could do and the most unbiased look we could give at whatever our topic is.
Thank you, Roopinder, for being on today's podcast, and it's been an absolute honor. As usual, I always enjoy my conversations with you. Thank you.
Mohua, you've, I think, brought out a lot of things in me which I didn't realize I would be talking about. And thank you. It's really been a pleasure to be.
Thank you.
To you, our dearest listeners, you can find us on your favorite streaming services, Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Podcast, and of course on all other major streaming services. With loads of love, we are The Mohua Show, where we talk ईमानदारी से.